All right, we are live. Welcome to the Friday FARcast. I'm Robert Phoenix, and as the we kind of it's not really the first Friday of the month, but we've had a few redirects and reroutes, and this is the first opportunity we've had to have our friends the Crimis on the show. So, welcome, Chris and Steve, to another Friday FARcast.
Here we
Thank you.
are.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Robert. Hey, friends out there.
Present
So-
and accounted for.
It's always good to have you on. Good to see you.
Thank
And
you.
Yeah.
people always enjoy our time together. It's like having tea with friends.
That's right. That's right.
Tea and
My
sympathy.
my tea today is mixed with moon dust from your
Oh.
friend Chris.
Right.
So we can have that as the shout out to Chris.
Well, I think we're going to go a little deeper now that you
Uh,
reminded me. So let's do that. If people don't know who Chris is the owner and operator of True Hemp Science, and he is a sponsor of the show. And he and his product were a huge hit at our event. He set up shop there,
Good.
and he was only there for one day on Friday, and he blew through all of his product.
Good for him.
It was
Great.
really
That's so gratifying.
right. So he said it was the absolute best market. He considered it like a market day. It was the best market day he's ever had.
Oh,
So-
wonderful.
Yeah. So we've been I think a positive burden for Chris because he has sold a lot of his CBD products through this show. And as a result of that, he's had to really up his production. So those are the kinds of issues as a business owner you want to have. You want to be able to make sure that you have enough product in stock. And it's kind of the story of our times. I mean, he's owner, operator, single proprietor, has one person working for him, and doing everything in his power to keep his business alive. Like a lot of Americans are doing right now, just like you guys. with
Like
your-
us.
Yeah,
Logo
with your-
Sophia,
with-
same
with
thing.
your- with your publishing company.
Yeah.
Yeah, since 2008.
And that's honestly, I mean, there's a number of reasons why I love to have you guys on the show, but that's one of them, is to help you support and promote your publishing
Yeah.
works, which we're going to talk about today with an epic chapter 10 from Hermes Runs the Game, which is I'm not going to say it's your capstone, Steve, but it's pretty darn close to your capstone in terms of your work. So we're going to talk about that today. But before we do, I just want to give a big shout out to True Hemp Science and Chris's wonderful CBD products. Steve was telling me just before we went live that he's got some moon dust in his tea. I had a little moon dust in my coffee today. Jasper had some moon dust on his cat food this
Oh,
morning.
good.
No, I'm just
Looks
kidding.
good.
I'm just kidding.
Oh, well, some people do give it to their animals.
I believe they do.
Yeah.
Jasper's already moony. He's already moony. But it's a great product because it does give you some clarity and some focus and kind of chills you out a little bit. You can add it to a lot of things. You can add it to your smoothies. I add it to my coffee. Steve has it in his tea.
It's-
And of course, the one of the other killer apps is the gummies with Chris, which are really great for sleep. And he is frantically putting together a new batch of gummies right now. So we're, like I said, we're a pleasant or positive burden to have, and it's just been great to see the interconnectedness between his products and our community, and being able to just have this circle of life in a lot of ways. So here's the deal: if you go to truehempscience.com/ref/23, yes, that camera is yours. And you buy $100 worth of product or more, and you type in 15 MINS, Chris will give you free product, and he's very generous with the products that he sends. Jasper, you're Godzilla today. If you get $150 worth of product, you get free shipping. So, and I don't want to go through all of his list of products. Go to his website, check it out. You will not be disappointed with the quality of the CBD and the service. All right. So let's get into Crimi
Right.
World.
Nicely done. Yes. And I'm glad you had a good event last weekend. Sorry that we did not make it. I'm sure
It's a
it
good
would've
thing
been-
we didn't go.
It would have been, yeah. And as many people in the chat room know, Chris was down for like 5 days, basically asleep,
Seven.
and down out of commission for about 10 days. But 5 of them, I mean, just basically asleep all day. So she's back up. She's not 100%, but she's in the realms anyway.
And it
She's
wasn't the
functional.
beast. It was an infection that went systemic. So it was not the beast.
Chris is a fighter. She's feisty.
Oh.
She's
Fighting Irish.
She's tough.
feisty.
Got Irish
Yeah.
and Polish, you know?
That's right. So you got the
Good
genes there,
peasant stock.
and then you've got your Da Capo next to you over there.
Yeah, no, Steve Bannon wouldn't stand a minute in the ring with you. So
Oh, I wouldn't fight Steve Bannon. I like Steve Bannon. I feel
See-
really
no,
bad.
but he's got
I heard
a
they give him
pugilistic
like 4 months in jail. I just read.
By the way, he's a Sagittarius.
I know he is.
A Sagittarius.
It's like one of the
Um,
very few Sages that I like. I'm always disappointed. With, oh, really? That person's a Sag. But I like Steve Bannon. I like him a lot.
Steve Bannon is one of these guys that I think he's a very interesting character.
Mhm. Smart,
Well, he's smart. He comes out of the naval world,
right? Really, Navy.
right? And then he was a part of the Navy during the Carter administration,
And he's
and-
over in the South China Sea.
and he saw just what a fuck up the entire thing was.
Mhm.
And he said, "This is not how these things should be run. This is not America putting its best foot forward." He comes from a blue collar family.
Mhm.
Working. It's not like he's a blue blood from Massachusetts or
Mhm.
comes out of a wealthy Jewish real estate family from New York City, and then he goes on to work for Goldman Sachs, and he learned a lot about the money game
Mhm.
through Goldman Sachs. Made a lot of money. I think he produced a couple of movies
Hmm.
as well. He had a small share, I think, in the Seinfeld show.
Oh,
Uh,
that's
He did,
interesting.
yeah. When Larry David found out
Huh.
about it, he was kind of pissed. So, and then he starts Breitbart. Well, he doesn't really start Breitbart. He comes on a little bit later, after Andrew Breitbart, dies. I mean, we could do a whole show on Andrew
Oh,
Breitbart.
that,
Mhm.
yeah. I read
We
his
should-
autobiography and I was very impressed. I thought, I don't know this man and I've only heard bad things about him. And I read his autobiography and I was very taken with Breitbart.
He's a very interesting character.
Yes, very
and
passionate.
very passionate, very articulate. He's an Aquarian, by the way, so he's a revolutionary.
Mm.
Yeah.
And again, his story, the commingling of these worlds gets very interesting, convoluted. He was adopted. Andrew Breitbart was adopted. You know that, right?
No, I don't
Didn't.
remember. I don't remember that. It might have
So-
been in the book, but
So I believe, if I'm not mistaken, his birth origin is Irish.
he
and-
looks Irish.
Yeah, and he was
Or
adopted.
almost English looking.
Right. And he was adopted by a Jewish family in Brentwood, California. So he grew up around, I believe, UCLA, that area.
Hmm.
And his parents were restaurateurs.
Hmm.
So, and he went through, the seasons and the rituals of being raised Jewish.
Hmm.
So he's got this very interesting kind of commingling of these worlds.
Well, there's a very curious connection with Judaism and Ireland.
Yes, there is.
Whole community of Jewish people in Ireland.
Well, there seems to be a whole community of Jewish people everywhere.
But regardless,
As far as I know what you're
it's like
saying.
it's in this Irish Catholic Protestant Jewish,
Right.
and they're
Yeah.
enclaves and
Right.
somehow connected with the Egyptian.
Yeah.
spirit.
If you go back
It's
to
very
like
curious.
through my mother's Irish, and she did one of those 23andMe's.
Mm.
And one of the things that they found was traces of Iberian in her.
Okay.
So
Well, there's a lot back and
Mhm.
it's,
forth.
Right,
it's,
right,
it's
right.
part of that loop, right?
Mhm.
So Breitbart winds up going to Tulane University
Right. And partying.
but then he wakes up there.
Mhm.
But he said if it weren't for the partying, he would have been sucked into the
System.
narrative.
That's right.
But the partying in this instance saved him from that indoctrination.
Right. And so he challenged the curriculum, and he challenged his instructors, and came away with a very different experience, right? It's a very Aquarian thing. You go in for indoctrination, you come out the other side, you're undoctrinated. And then he sets up Breitbart, and then there's that, that classic picture with him in Israel with Bibi Netanyahu, right? One of the first meetings of the Breitbart staff. And then Steve Bannon comes on after Andrew Breitbart leaves, by the way, do you know one of the last things that Andrew Breitbart did before he died? He had dinner with Bill Ayers. Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn invited him over for dinner.
Interesting.
And he actually wrote about that. I think he had pad thai or something at their place. And then Steve Bannon comes on. He's backed by the Mercer family out of Florida, who wind up becoming a huge patron of his and also Donald Trump's. So now Steve Bannon has this world connected to Goldman Sachs and connected to the Mercers, and through Breitbart, which has its roots through it essentially being developed, through Andrew and the trip to Israel. So all these weird things begin to commingle now, and one of Steve Bannon's proteges is Royce White. Have you seen Royce at all?
I don't know.
So Royce used to play. Well, Royce played college basketball. He was very good.
That's why I don't know.
Well, he got drafted by I think it was the.
Have you played a video with him?
I think I might have played a video. I got into it with Royce yesterday on Twitter, although he didn't know it was me. I have a burner account on Twitter that allows me to say things that my ultra self doesn't always want to say. I can say them. It's not a big deal, but it's like a way for me to play a little Gemini role. Anyway, so Royce got drafted in the first round, I think by the Mavericks or somebody like that. I forget, but he never played a minute of pro basketball because one of Royce's issues was mental health. And Royce had some issues just in terms of being able to get his head together. And he wanted to make the mental health thing a big part of his platform in the NBA. So he's kind of ahead of the curve on the mental health stuff. He never played a minute in the NBA. And I think part of one of Royce's phobias is flying. He'll deny that, but it was one of his phobias, and he didn't want to get on a plane and travel to all these different cities to play ball. So Royce eventually drops out, and Royce will play a role in our discussion of George Floyd.
I want to back up 1 minute and ask you, what do you mean like he's ahead of the curve on mental health?
Well, I mean, the whole mental health thing became kind of a cause celeb in sports over the last 3 or 4 years. You had
How so?
Well, people like Kevin Love, who plays for the Cleveland Cavaliers, whose father Stan Love played in the NBA for the Chicago Bulls. Very good player, Kevin Love. He started to talk about his issues around mental health and anxiety, and there's a lot of pressure put on athletes.
Oh my goodness, I'm sure.
And pressure to perform. In many instances, they have to deal with that pressure from a very early age. Mm-hmm. And being the father of a son who played a lot of baseball, and I managed and coached his teams, I had a front row seat for that with other parents, and even myself at times. I was a little hard on my kid, not incredibly hard, but I wanted him to know that just because he was my son, he wasn't like the coach's son. So he kind of, I think at times resented it that it's not like I treated him poorly, but I wanted to treat him like everybody else. So, and then later on, it became a bit tricky because there's just this dynamic in sports that's very, very competitive. And when you live in a state like Texas, it's uber competitive. It doesn't matter what the sport is,
Mm.
whether it's football or baseball or basketball. It's just uber competitive here. So when you get to a certain level of competition, my son played travel ball. He was a pretty good player. But one of the things that was happening for him was his growth curve. And like right now, he's almost as tall as I am, and I'm 6'3".
Mm.
But back then, he wasn't that tall. And when you play youth sports, it's like natural selection. In baseball, they always pick the tallest kids. This is the new thing now. They pick the tallest kids to play on the elite teams because they're going to be bigger and stronger. And so some kids, like I think my son at the time may have been about, I don't know, 5'5". He was young. He's like 13 years old, 5'6", something like that. And at the same age, he's dealing with kids that are like 5'10", 5'11", 6 feet. And those kids may not grow again, right? That might be their growth spurt. So it's a hard place for some kids to be. And you see these kids like who just have a leg up at that point, and they're getting the reps, they're getting the privilege of playing with the better coaches. So there's a separation that starts to take place. And unless you have an attitude that is very determined, it's very hard to stay on that track. It's very, very hard. And if you're not really big or tall, you have to have at least one skill that can set you apart. And that skill would be something like speed. So if you're not real tall and strong, but you're fast, you can have a place in that world. Well, unfortunately, my son got my speed genes, which is nil. So, this is where I kind of, unfortunately, because I want to see him succeed, right? And I applied some pressure to him to, get more determined and more involved. And that was right at that time where he's hitting 14, go through the Saturn opposition. And, it was just done. Like we were done. It was like the relationship in that world was over for us. And some kids can stay with it. Like if you go back and watch the Brian Bosworth 30 for 30, he had a relentless football father. It's a great, a lot of people don't know who Brian Bosworth is, but the 30 for 30 is actually a really good documentary because he goes to a storage space where he has all of his memorabilia, and he brings his own son, and he's just going through his memorabilia in this storage space and telling his story about what it was like to grow up with a hardcore football dad. And some kids can respond to it, and they're into it, right? Like another kid, Adam Archuleta, who played football for the I think it was the St. Louis Rams, another kind of undersized kid, but his father got him to train with this Russian trainer, this guy from Russia. And he was doing stuff with Adam Archuleta that was kind of, insane training wise. But Adam Archuleta maximized whatever he had, right? Like when you have that kind of edge and you have that kind of determination, you have that kind of commitment, you can maximize but you have to have the right mindset, and you have to be able to be determined. The horror story, of course, is Todd Marinovich, whose father Marv played for the Oakland Raiders and turned him into his nickname was Robo QB. And there's been a bunch of stories done on Todd. And Todd was a great quarterback, played for USC, but he burned out. He did drugs, and so this is what happens with kids and sports.
Yeah. I never liked sports.
Yeah,
I never did well at it. I always ran and hid.
It's challenging.
If we were playing softball, I hid under the bleachers. If we were playing soccer, I ran inside and huddled up next to the heater in the hallway. I hated it.
Yeah. So it's all about these growth curves and growth patterns, and there is a natural process that winnows people out. It's just the way it is.
I don't like the competition. I think competition, I always felt more for the person who was losing or the team that was losing. And, you know, I even see it like when Steve's watching baseball. It's like, oh, my team's losing. You know, it's like, what a downer.
Is that what I say?
Oh, worse. But
So-
anyway,
so
you know,
Chris,
that's
do you
my
think
problem with it.
do you think that do you think that that's a feminine thing, like kind of the
No,
emotional
I
side of
don't,
it?
because there are a
Right.
lot of women who enjoy sports. I just was never good at it.
Right.
And so I always felt diminished by it rather than uplifted. I'm just not competitive. I'm more cooperative than I am competitive. It just doesn't sit well with me.
Jordan
And
Peterson.
I understand that competition has its place because it impels you to do better. But there has to be some way that you can be impelled to be your best and to strive for the highest you can be without this kind of metallic edge to it. That
So,
it's
yeah.
like, I feel like you're cutting splinters sometimes.
So Jordan Peterson talks a lot about this.
Does he?
Yeah, he talks about people that are agreeable or disagreeable by nature,
Mhm.
right? And agreeable people, you would be in the agreeable camp, right? You're looking for commonality, you're looking for shared values, you're looking for people that you can relate to without conflict,
Mhm.
right? The disagreeable part are people that are willing to be disagreeable. Like, for instance, Michael Jordan would fit into that world. He was very disagreeable. He was an asshole, right? And so you see these people that compete at really high levels, and they have high levels of disagreeability.
Good. They can all be together and leave the rest of us to be.
Well, I think
They're on the
there's,
side.
I think there's room for both. But my experience now, and again, this is the fourth year that I've done the event, is I think the optimal model is a combination of disagreeableness
Yeah.
and agreeableness.
Yeah, I-
So just by the fact that people show up at my event, right, there's some degree of disagreeability because they're not agreeing with the system or the narrative,
I can see it.
right? So they're disagreeable.
Sure.
And then once they're in that environment, they're very agreeable together. So to me, this is the Aquarian age where people can, you know, be who they are at an authentic level, which may not always be agreeable. But
Yeah, of course,
Yeah,
you
agreed.
can't have human beings together in one room and not have a mixture of those qualities. All of those qualities are necessary.
so
Agreeable is not complacent.
and again, we're off on a little bit of a sidetrack, but I think it's an interesting discussion. Like, look at the current political situation in the world. You know, look at woke culture. Woke culture will not tolerate disagreeableness. Like, they are the epitome of watered down agreeability because they all agree on one thing,
With
right?
incredible resentment.
Right. But they all agree on one thing. They all agree on this one thing. And if you disagree with them, even if it's just by slight degrees,
Mhm.
you know, you're an enemy, you're an outcast.
Mhm.
So it's almost like the epitome of negative agreeability. So even somebody who's a minor person who says, well, I think a woman's really a woman and not a birthing person, now all of a sudden that person has become disagreeable.
Sure, look what happened to J.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter books. She was, you know, adored and adored and adored by everybody, and especially by the woke people. The first time she even mentioned, you know, that she's just not down with this birthing person shit, she was blasted like you wouldn't believe. I mean, the vitriol hurled at her, you know, whether or not even, you know, whatever else is involved with her writing the books, whether it's Tavistokian or not, and all that sort of side issue. You know, she's so I laud her for, you know, for taking a stand and staying with it, not backtracking and apologizing for taking a stand, as anyone in the public view who's, you know, I mean, obviously she made enough money, but, you know, that's it. There's just nothing. There's black and white, and that's it, you know, and it's troubling. There is no discussion.
Well, and then she takes on Alex Jones and publicly blasts Alex Jones.
So that I missed that, so I don't follow that whole thing.
Well,
What was her?
So, well, she came out and railed on him, and
That one.
but again, now we're in the realm of speech, right? And whatever Alex Jones said or didn't say, and and even though she didn't backtrack, it's like, okay, well, here, let me plant my flag over here and go after Alex Jones, so that it's almost like a virtue signal.
Yeah. Oh, but there's a bunch of stuff that I disagree with her on. And,
Right.
And as an aside, Alex Jones's new book is actually excellent.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
we both read it, and I was very impressed. You don't hear any of the loud shouting. It's what he's done, and he's read Klaus Schwab's book, and he's read Harari's book,
Mhm.
Yuval Harari, and he just says, "Here are their words. Here's what they're saying," and then he is also helpful at unpacking. You see how the language is cloaking their real intention. But then by the end, they take the mask off and they are just like,
Right.
you're staring
Yeah.
down the devil. And
Right.
they just come right out and
But,
say, well,
yeah. Yeah, he did a really good.
got to get rid of people.
I thought he did. It was not a lot new in there, but I think he did a really good job. It's a real good primer
It was very clear.
on deconstructing their language.
Yeah, I was
You know.
very impressed with it. Actually.
Well, I've watched InfoWars off and on over the years, and Alex Jones is always at his best when he's able to reference these white papers that he's read and go into them and break them down.
That's what he did.
And essentially synthesize the material.
That's what the book is. And there's no histrionics in it at all. It's just, here's a conversation. Here's what I saw when I read these words. This is my interpretation. See what you think. It was really good.
Yeah, and then a few doses of sarcasm, which I always
Yeah,
like.
well, I mean, not over much though.
No.
Really,
No.
he couldn't be blamed. Anyway, I feel really bad what they did to him. I feel really bad when I see they've made a piñata out of him.
It's a terrible precedent.
Oh,
It's a terrible precedent.
It's horrific.
Now you have Kanye. We'll talk about Kanye a little bit later when we get into Hermes, who came out and said something about George Floyd, which you covered, by the way, Steve, in the chapter in the fentanyl piece. And Kanye talked about that. Now all of a sudden, George Floyd's family is suing him for $250 million for defamation.
Suing Kanye. Okay.
And by the way, Kanye contributed to George Floyd's daughter and her scholarship fund. And nobody from the Floyd family ever reached out to him to say thank you or anything like that.
No. And none of it really.
And now they're suing him. So this goes back into this goes back into Royce White, who is disagreeable. And the reason I brought him up, he's Steve Bannon's protege. Like, he studies with Steve Bannon. And Royce was there in Minneapolis. It's where he's from. And he was on the ground during the George Floyd riots. And his plan was to lead a group of people away from the police station to the Federal Reserve. And Royce is an Aries, so he's like a soldier. And that's what he did.
Was he successful in getting them to move on?
Well, yeah. I mean,
the reserve.
Yeah, I think he was. I mean, you get into a crowd situation like that, and the madness of the crowd. And Royce is a big personality. He's got big energy. He's got a big voice. He's 6'5". And he wound up managing to get people to the Federal Reserve and trying to tell them, this is your problem. This is your problem. This is where the scam is. And I differ with him about some of his analysis around how he perceived Antifa and Black Lives Matter. He sees them as being in some ways heroic, because while people were sitting around cowering in their homes due to COVID, they were the ones that were disagreeable enough to hit the streets. Well, he's not informed, because there are people that were going to places like Sacramento and protesting at the Capitol in Sacramento in person,
Yeah.
without masks. People were taking the beaches in Southern California. There were these car convoys going past capitals and hospitals and honking their horns. So it wasn't like people were just passive during that time.
No, there was some great there. The Sacramento. I forget. There was a great speech that some
Remember that doctor?
military
That
person-
doctor? Yeah, that doctor gave. It was like, wow, this is incredible.
there was a lot of, it was just starting to brew the pushback against the lockdowns. And so this was part, I don't get into this really, because it's a little outside of the what I'm doing in the book. But yes, that's exactly what happened. And it was almost like this momentum was building to push back against the narrative and really the fascism that was being dumped on us.
That's right.
And then the Floyd thing happened, and it just flipped upside down, and it became a BLM Antifa thing, or what I call in the book Blantifa.
That's good.
And it just flipped, and it became completely controlled by the people who brought this on.
That's right. And again, I think I like a lot of what Royce has to say, but I think he's incredibly naive. I mean, do you think people like average Americans, middle Americans, are going to go out and take to the streets and protest with Antifa and BLM? I mean, that's essentially what he was saying that they should have done. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Right.
They're watching America burn. They're watching people be murdered. Why would they want to go out and join that melee? I kind of differ with him on that, but this all goes back to the mental health thing to kind of bring it full circle.
Right.
So what's happened in sports, the gymnast who went to Japan and tapped out, whatever her name
At
is.
the Olympics, right? I forget.
Yeah.
And there were some hockey players too, as I recall, who were during the lockdown talking about it also.
Right. So this whole idea of mental health in sports has become a thing, right? So Royce was way ahead of it back in the day.
Well,
and he's Steve Bannon's protege, and I guess Steve Bannon got sentenced to 4 years and $6,000 fine for being in contempt. Is that right?
It's 4 months.
4 months. 4 months.
4 months. Yeah. And also you can take it all the way back to Roger Maris in 1961, chasing at the time Babe Ruth's record. And it was a lot of vitriol against him for that too, because everybody wanted Mickey Mantle to break the record. They were kind of neck and neck until Mantle got some sort of weird infection at the end of the year. And so he ended up with 54 home runs that year. But Roger Maris lost his hair, lost a lot of his hair,
From
not all
stress?
of it. Yeah, so he was so stressed out from chasing Babe Ruth, and very different with Aaron Judge, of course, because Aaron Judge isn't chasing the all-time record, but this year he broke the record. He has the most home runs without steroids, basically. That would be his claim if he were to make it.
Title.
But he won't make it. He's enough of a class act to just stay within the situation and not make any claims like that. Let everybody else figure that out.
So we're going to move on to, I think, your chapter here in a second. But Jason Whitlock actually talked about this with Aaron Judge, and Aaron Judge being the kind of the anti-Colin Kaepernick, because both of them were adopted by white Caucasian parents. And, Aaron Judge was not celebrated, right? Like he's having this, epic season that nobody's ever really had. I mean, you have Bonds and McGuire and Sosa, but they're all juiced up.
Mm-hmm.
And it really should have been the big story of the summer in a lot of ways. And it was, not that much of a big deal. And he believes has to do with the fact that Aaron Judge is a good guy, right? That he's not political. He's not woke. He has these loving parents that have a good relationship with him. Like it just doesn't fit the narrative for the sort of the common sports world today. And I agree with Jason. This should have been a much bigger story just in terms of sports.
Well, it was in New York.
Right. But in national media, it was down the list. It was definitely down the list. I mean, it would be like, how's Russell Wilson going to do in Denver this year?
Yeah. Well, football is always, or is still superseding baseball, which, I can't watch
Well,
football
because it's a
anymore.
blood
I
sport.
can't watch basketball anymore. That's it. And I won't watch tennis anymore because of what they did to their number one player, and for not getting the shot, and
Right.
also to any Russian player, like who the fuck are they? But they run the show. The top players should have, but they don't have enough class and guts to do it. The top players just should have abandoned the U.S. Open, and no
Mhm.
one would show up. And
That would be the end of it.
and that would how you take your power. Just like if everyone didn't wear the mask, we would
Right.
have taken that power back. It's really simple, on
agree.
that level.
Yeah.
So real quick, before I open up your PDF, we get into your chapter. What's the temperature like in your area for mask wearing? What percentage of people do you think are still wearing masks in public?
30?
Yeah, I'd say maybe less than when this was a supermarket here where everyone wore masks and I was the only one who wasn't during when there were the full restrictions. Now I'd say it's like 20,
Actually,
10% maybe, not a lot. But I still breaks my heart. I was at the a post office yesterday, and a woman was there with her granddaughter, and it
well,
was
that's the worst.
seeing like a 6-year-old kid with the mask on. Sorry,
I was out yesterday and I only actually saw one person, an employee in a store, which I thought was pretty good. I don't think anybody else was.
But that's it here. So there's still a lot of
But even
people.
at that, I felt bad when I looked at her and she was having trouble breathing. You could hear it.
Right. Really early on, when I was all in on doing everything I could to dispel the whole mask thing, I looked at studies around anxiety and breathing. And there's clearly, there are clear studies out there
Mhm.
that when people have less oxygen, their levels of anxiety
Mhm.
increase.
Why do you think waterboarding is such a popular, indoor sport with
Yeah.
intelligence agencies?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I cite those studies.
Imagine the anxiety involved in some horrific thing like that.
Yeah. In
And that's a
the
mask.
sorry.
It's a mask. Go ahead.
Sorry. In the book, so what the book basically is, it's a sort of a step by step. What is sacrifice? What is the original sacrifice? What was the sacred sacrifices of Greece about? And then how everything has been inverted. And so you can take like the first one. The first thing you do is an ablution. You wash your hands before doing a sacrifice, like the Muslims do before they pray. And
Hands and feet.
and then what was the first thing that happened? Wash your hands, right? But it wasn't wash your hands. It was use this chemical crap all over your hands, which actually got into your blood and made things worse, right?
The Pharisees were like that too, right? I mean, the Pharisees were all about the cleanliness of the body.
Mhm.
And to me, it was a real Pharisaic ritual.
Right.
And what did Jesus say? It doesn't matter, how many ablutions you do. If your spirit and your soul isn't clean, it doesn't matter.
True.
Right.
Well, it's
So-
like
True.
Lady Macbeth, out damn spot.
True. But as whether it's symbolic or not, what it became is another inversion. And then, so then the mask is another part. The celebration along with the Greek sacrificial ritual turned into the riots, so there's also a lot of book leading up to this section is about this. This is the section about the actual sacrifice itself. The prayers of the ritual turns into, and I get into in this chapter, it is dark Yoruba rituals performed by BLM, Patricia Cullors, and I forget the other woman's name who was head of BLM in LA.
And say their name.
So yeah, and then I'll talk about that when we pull it up, I guess. So this whole thing has been leading up piece by piece, is how every aspect.
Alicia Garza is another big person in BLM.
I think that's who we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
So that's what's leading up to it, and then the actual sacrifice itself, or the anti-sacrifice itself, is the what I consider to be the murder of George Floyd. day after my birthday in 2020,
Mhm.
May
But
20,
it was-
May 25th,
May
2020.
25th.
But it was the drugs.
Right. So,
The
Anyway,
day the day the music died.
yeah. So, like I said, instead of this sort of the celebration, it was also this Greek sacrifice was a very aesthetic event. There was a cultural event. There would be poetry. Might do plays or readings. There was lots of music involved. That sort of thing. It was a communal thing, and
Celebratory.
then it was the communal meal afterwards of the sacrifice, which got split between the gods and the humans.
So this is chapter 10, correct?
It's around 10. I lost count actually, but it's around that much.
Where are you in the entire process? Are you nearing the finish line here?
Yeah, so I think I've got 2 more chapters after this one. And this one's a tough one because the one I'm writing now is on child sacrifice and the murder of it and the history of it, and just how it relates to this. And then I'm going to do another chapter on how this relates to traditional initiation, and then like some mop-up work, but that's about it. So I've been on this a year and a half. You can see even by this, it's massively footnoted. That's one of the things that takes a really long time. It's not like writing a blog post, you can just say what the hell you want. It's everything I say. There are hundreds of footnotes in here, hundreds of references, and all that takes a really long time to go through. So, but I see the finish line now, at least after I got this chapter done, a few weeks ago. So,
by the way, there's this movie clip from the 1930s that's making the rounds now from Chicago. Have you seen that clip? Where there's a group of people. It's a gathering of American Zionists in Chicago. Have you seen that clip?
No.
Mm-mm.
Maybe I'll play it for the end of the show.
It relates somehow.
Oh yeah, it gets into child sacrifice and Moloch.
Oh,
Okay.
interesting.
And they're actually doing a performance ritual Moloch sacrifice on stage.
Okay.
This wasn't Metropolis. This wasn't.
No, this was an actual event in Chicago. Actual event in Chicago. I think it was 34, 35. And this film has been making the rounds. And,
so it's actual footage from an actual event.
That's right.
They weren't doing a sacrifice, but they were performing it as if they were.
Oh no.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so this is all right.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. So I haven't come across this, but it'd be.
Well, we'll see. At the end of this, before we transition into the Halloween stuff, maybe I can find it. Okay, let's get cracking here. We got a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, we can zip through a lot of this. Yeah.
Yep. Got about an hour of time here. So let's get jamming.
Okay, right. So that is one of the few. There are very few depictions of the actual sacrifice. So that amphora that we just passed through is an actual showing of, and this was a hard image it's actually a really hard image to get. I had to actually talk to a lot of people in Italy to get this one.
Really?
And some of it in Italian. But anyway, so this is not the sacrifice is really, so they sacrifice itself, they cut open the neck. So this relates also to George Floyd with the not being able to breathe, even though they didn't cut his neck. That's a whole other thing. And just the other interesting thing about this, besides the fact that it's in great shape, is that there's like, not quite sure what's going on at the end. There's like somebody holding the tail and someone else is facing the other way. So there's something with that. And so they collect the blood. You see the second person from the right it's a particular plate that they would use to collect the blood, and they would make blood sausages and things like that with the sacrifice. So I just want to give a description of that.
And then the whole community would partake.
Right. So there would be communal meal after the sacrifice. Some of it was put on an altar for the gods, and some of it was for the people. And that's a whole other story that I get into another chapter, how that came about. So,
550 BC, right? That's the dating on it.
yeah, so that's when a lot of this stuff, yeah. So this from the class, try to get as much as I can, as old as I can, from the classical age of Greece, So this is, whatever, 200 years before Plato. So, yeah, I open up with a Stranglers quote from their song "Death and Night and Blood." When I saw that Sparta in his eyes, young death is good, and we decided to die. There was no greater love, death and night and blood. It's a very intense song. I do put in a lot of quotes from contemporary songs.
And of course, the band is interesting because it's the Stranglers, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for picking up on that.
Sure. You could have used Stranglehold by Ted Nugent too, by the way.
I don't know the lyrics to that, but I could still look it up. There's still
I got you in a Stranglehold, baby.
It's still a work in progress.
But I think the Death and Night and Blood and Sparta and the Stranglers is a perfect fit. Perfect fit. All right, here we go. We're gonna launch into it.
So yeah, I don't know how do I talk about it. So anyway, so the first I started with some quotes about how it worked. I think I kind of gave a good description of what was there. There was also a scattering of grain, and the grain, of course, brings in Demeter, the mother goddess of Greece, and Demeter is also the person to whom the Eleusinian mysteries are dedicated to, along with her daughter Kore or Persephone.
Right.
So
her correlative would be Ceres, right? Demeter's correlative would be Ceres.
Yes, that's another one, right? Where we get cereal from.
Right.
Right. So the grain is important, but I don't get into it too much. I think we can kind of roll on. So the Spagion was the bowl that it was collected in. So these are descriptions in some books, and this is another one of the other few depictions of the actual killing of an animal here, a ram, and this is a soldier doing it. So sometimes there were sacrifices that you would do like on the eve of a war, and those were called holocausts. And those were not sacrificial meals, but those were where you would actually immolate the entire animals. You might do, if it was a big war, if you're going off to the Trojan War, the Trojan War, going off to that one, that's another sacrifice. So that's a sacrifice of Agamemnon's daughter. And that's a whole other story that I get into in a chapter that I'm writing now. So yeah, so you can
what's also interesting is that astrologically during that time, Mars is in Aries, which is the ram, right? So that's another correlation to this whole thing.
Yeah, that's good, and I might have to hit you up on that in the final rewrite.
Yeah.
I'm
here for you, Steve.
Well, you're thanked in the introduction.
I appreciate it.
Because the original name of the book was actually Geminid Reality, and then it really came to be that Hermes himself became the whole focus of the book. Yeah, and then they also clipped the chin hairs, which is another interesting thing, which really reminds you of sort of magic rituals.
It's a good thing I have it's a good thing I have my earbuds in, because Jasper doesn't want to hear that.
No.
Clipping of the chin hairs, that would be traumatic for him.
Yes. So that seemed to be sort of a binding ritual. So the whole ritual coming up to the sacrifice is this way of binding yourself to the deity being sacrificed to and to the community. Okay, so that's really one of the important things to realize. Why this sacrificial ritual was done for so long in Greece. It was done in the Middle East everywhere, but it wasn't done in the same way with the communal meal. And anybody who knows, what went on in the Temple of Jerusalem, they were sacrificing animals night and day. It was an abattoir. People think that, it's just a bunch of Jews murmuring at the wall, with their little squares on. It's not. It was sacrifice all the time, even, and then exemplified by the supposed non-sacrifice of Isaac by Abraham.
Right. The supposed non-sacrifice.
Right. Which is a weird story because there's nothing there in the actual
It's so weird. It's just a really weird story.
Yeah. And there's like, Abe is like, Abraham's like, oh, okay, you want me to sacrifice my son? He doesn't even say anything. There's nothing by him. There's no protest by Abraham. He just like kind of goes and does it. And it just dawned on me, because I'm writing about that too, just a little bit. Besides the fact there's nothing there, besides the fact that Isaac disappears more or less from the Bible after that, there's no story of Isaac and his, and his kingship or whatever.
Kind of like Isaac Cappy just disappearing.
Right. So, but the thing is, why does Yahweh have to test Abraham? So that means one of two things, right? Either Yahweh is not omniscient, because if he was omniscient, he would
have known.
He would have known, right?
Right,
I mean,
right.
I haven't seen that anywhere, and I can't be the first person to come up with this. It's too friggin' obvious, or Yahweh is sadistic, and I kind of go with that.
I think he's a psychopath.
And then that gets us all, and I agree with John Lamb Lash on a lot of that. That Yahweh is basically, head of a particular group of archons that is in full flower right now.
So what so one of the reasons why you're on this show today was the first book that you sent me, which was Good Crack. Your Crack. And I just remember you being an excellent writer. Like, you were a really good writer. And
thank you. I appreciate that.
And it, you could just see it in this paragraph. Ancient texts speak of some variance at the moment of death. There may be an odd silence or a bone vibrating ululation from the women, blood either sprinkled or gushed over the altar. Is that syrinx? Is that what that is?
Yeah, that's the flute.
Syrinx. Plain or not, likely all these happened at different sanctuaries. Death is the pivot upon which the sacrifice becomes real. The hermetic and hecatic doorway cracked open just enough for the transformational power of the life into death threshold to squeeze through and be utilized. Hermes rules the hinges of this sacrificial portal, the fluid aqueduct, channeling life and death, Olympus and Hades. And all these passageways lie within the precisely performed ancient ritual, opening an apotheosis in the experience of the participants, or a precise ritual inviting dark forces of violence and control, as happened spring 2020. Hermes opens the door, but it is we who send the invitations to cross the threshold. Good or ill, as we have seen, depends on the ritual, its language, its intention, and the God invoked. That's a great paragraph.
Thank you.
Thank you.
He sounds good. Sounds good coming from him. I may hire you to do the audiobook.
It's funny, when I was reading it, I thought to myself, John Cale would sound really good reciting this.
John Cale.
The deep kind of slightly Welsh thing he's got going on there.
Yeah.
Let's keep going. What do we got here?
Thank you for that, Robert.
I appreciate that, Robert. I and I'm in my mind anyway, I'm 1,000 times better writer than I am a speaker. Speaking always is a struggle. And this is one of the early stories about the sacrifice, which I found really interesting, is in the Odyssey. So at one point, Odysseus, he and his men are held by Circe, or Circe, I guess is probably how it's actually pronounced. And she turns his men into swine, but she puts him under a spell. She's like a prototypical, sorceress also, besides being a goddess. And he just gets sucked into being, the gigolo of the goddess for a long period of time. But, and next is actually what Hermes does just before she gives him the poison that would have turned him into a swine, drops an herb in there. And so that protects him from that. And eventually Zeus sends Hermes again to her and say, look, it's time to let this guy go. And that's how he goes. But he needs wisdom from someone who's already died. This the most famous seer in Greece named Tiresias. And Tiresias is already in Hades. But because he was such a great seer, Persephone let him have his mind while he was still in Hades. So he's not just a shade flitting about. Okay. Odysseus has to go, and I have the story here in full. So Odysseus goes down. So he gets instructions from Circe, Circe, how to go to find Hades. Right. So this is one of Odysseus. Odysseus is basically the most Hermes-like of all of the Greek characters and Greek heroes. He's the trickster. You know, he's a very linguistic person. You know, for example, when the very famous stories when he is trapped by the Polyphemus, the huge Cyclops, the Cyclops asks him his name, and he says, "My name is No Man." And eventually, when they escape, they escape by putting sheep pelts on top of themselves. So he thinks that his sheep are going out because Odysseus has blinded him with a burning log from the fire. So they all escape, and they're out in the ship running away, and he's just throwing rocks so he can't see them. And then the other Cyclopses come out. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And he goes, "No man has tricked me. No man has betrayed me." You know, and he said, well, then they're like, "What's the problem?" I mean, it's one of the goofiest things, but to think that this is coming out, whatever it was, 800 BC, you know, is this sort of linguistic trick on this whole thing that Odysseus plays. So that's Odysseus. He goes down, and in order for him, the Cyclops' father is Neptune. Neptune is stopping Odysseus from getting home. So Circe gives Odysseus directions to Hades so that he can consult this seer to tell him how to go home. So he goes down, and then he performs a sacrifice at the beginning. And what happens, so this is what ties into what I talk about, is that the blood of the sacrifice starts drawing up the shades from Hades. And what he does, so first of all, so that's weird. So why is blood still important to the shades in Hades? People have already passed, theoretically beyond the physical, right?
Yeah.
And he has a sword that is either made of copper or not steel, bronze. And he has to keep on chasing away the shades. Now, again, that's weird too. Why are the shades afraid of a sword if they are immaterial?
So what is the metallic?
Right. So there's something with his sword made of copper. And of course, copper is a part of the blood. So he's chasing them away, and finally, and then there's like a scene right out of the movies. His mother shows up, and he goes to hug her, and her arms go right through the shade. The thing is, if you read the Iliad and the Odyssey, that's like take your care, like 98% of everything you've ever seen in the movies comes out of those two books. I mean, no one reads them anymore, but it's all in there.
Right.
So,
before you move on, I have a question. Do we get the word circus from Circe or Circe?
Very possible that I'd have to check that out. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. Pharmacon is also scapegoat in Greek, besides being a poison or a drug to heal.
Mm-hmm.
So, good. Bring this up. So this is Odysseus chasing one of the shades out with his sword. And there you can see the sacrificial animal there. And there's Hermes right behind him. Hermes with his early form of a caduceus. So the shade is far on the left.
And the wings on the ankles.
Yeah, that's Hermes' trademark.
It's interesting. I wasn't curious, but I thought it was curious that in Marvel Comics, Submariner, Namor, which is Roman backwards, had wings on his ankles.
Mm.
So yes, no, he had wings. So and again, theoretically, he was the king of Atlantis, just like how DC had Aquaman and stuff like that. They both had their versions of that, and then he also looked like Leonard Nimoy, with the pointed ears from Star Trek. Anyway, but he had this underwater Neptunian figure in Marvel had the wings on his ankles, just like
Interesting.
Hermes
Yeah.
does. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't recall any of that. But so anyway, the upshot is that he gets from that where he needs to go from Tiriasis. But the whole thing with about where the sacrificial blood and how it attracts people who are in the etheric, or people who are shades in Hades. And so this leads back to the end of the chapter when I get into a little bit of Rudolf Steiner.
So what you're doing here is you're setting the stage, right? You're
Right.
using a classical motif that is based on the idea of sacrifice, Hermes' role in sacrifice, and what it means ultimately as you move through this and bring it into our current milieu, right?
Right. And then, so there's where I actually wrote it. Thank you for giving me the place to remember. So the sword is either copper or iron. Iron is in the blood. Copper is chlorophyll. That's
right.
the only molecular difference between the two.
And between plants and
Between plants.
between chlorophyll and hemoglobin.
Right.
And copper is conductive.
Mhm.
That's another big thing
Right.
about copper.
And blood is so
Right.
big in this whole issue.
Right. So then we run into the whole Faustian thing,
Mhm.
right? Where the contract is signed in blood. And you don't have to really get too deep into that, but that's a really nice depiction of a particular painter who I never heard of, Christoph Heisman in the 1600s, who actually claimed that he sold his soul to the devil in order to paint. And he did a triptych about how on the left you see him making a contract with the devil, who is looking like a fine Rothschildian businessman wearing red.
But like a traveler.
And then on the right, he's
This is interesting with the dog here.
mhm.
Dog
This-
usually is loyalty.
Well, it's also when you look at the depiction of the fool in Tarot, the fool always has a dog nipping
Right.
at his ankles.
Right.
Yes.
And also it's a very similar to the in the Mithrian temples, that there was always a dog at the bottom of the tauroctomy.
What is going on over here? What is that?
You see?
I'm not sure unless that's something with his moniker. I don't know.
Is that a C? Is that what that is?
It looks like the
It
letter
looks like a
C.
C, so it could be emblematic of the painter.
Mhm.
And then so on the
But there is
right,
a red, it is like a red shield.
and in the right, he's sealing it in blood, and in the center, the Virgin Mary comes in and basically releases him from the contract by exorcising the demon that he's contracted with.
Wow.
Lucky him.
So it's an
Yeah.
interesting piece of
That's very interesting. So when you were searching for a lot of this art, did that take a long time? Did you have to do clearance? What was the process like that?
most of it I found on Wiki Commons.
Mhm.
So that's been a really good source. Usually if nothing is cited, that's where it's from. And a couple of them I had to buy, like the initial one. I didn't need to buy. Most of the time they just want, the citation correct from museums and things like that. I try to, I avoid, Alamy and the rest of the, what's the Getty images.
Mhm.
I try to avoid them as much as I can. They're very expensive, so so there's a lot out there that's in the commons that you can
Right.
find.
Right.
The trouble sometimes is getting a high resolution enough image to use in a book.
So now you got little talking heads in there.
Right, because that echoes the what a blood is a special substance, which is a direct quote from Goethe's Faust.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So now we get to Terminal Minneapolis, which happened on 38th Street and Chicago Avenue. So I say one could almost say it was signed in fentanyl. And then so what happens again, a couple of things with George Floyd that is an inversion. So one of the things they would do with the sacrifice is dress it up. If it was like a cow or a bull with horns, they would gild them. And they would put whatever flower garlands, and they would dress them up as you would do. And you wouldn't take, there's plenty of stories too, that like someone finds like a golden ram in there, and that they were going to sacrifice, and they say, oh no, I'll keep this for myself. Well, there's always a price to pay for that. So in the standard sacrifice, you found your best, and that was what was your sacrifice. You're offering your best to the gods, because that's what they deserve. All right. So what happens in this space in front of what's it called, Cup Foods, where
that's interesting. I was going to actually ask you about even the name Cup Foods, right? The whole symbol of the cup, right?
Or like a chalice,
right?
Like a chalice, yeah.
Chalice,
I always found that to be weird.
Right.
Yes.
Well, yes. So, and I thank you, because I didn't put this in, and I should. That they call it the crater, Krater, in ancient Greece. And Plato talks about it, and there's actually an Orphic hymn to the crater that's lost. But it would be a place where they would mix things for the sacrifice, or you would mix things. I'm guessing in the Eleusinian Mysteries is where they would mix the kykeon. So they would always be mixing in these sacred bowls that they called craters. And then again, the blood is caught into a bowl from the sacrifice itself.
Yeah. So cup.
And right across from Cup Foods was it like a subterranean mosque, right? You know that, right? Like there was right across from Cup Foods, there was a place where they would go, they being the Muslim community, because that's a Cup Foods is a Muslim run store, right? So right across the street was a place where the Muslim men would go and do prayer, and who knows what else there, right? So I don't know if you caught that.
Maybe Miriam Hanane knows about
right.
that.
I don't.
That would be
right. And so I could bring up Miriam Hanane, from whom I've got a fair amount of information, and we're going to publish her book.
Is this true that these Christian groups have tried to have
look at the picture.
Revivals there?
Look at the picture. So there's a picture of it.
That's them.
This is where it became. This is what it became. So yes. So they were doing revivals. I have the citation. And so what they made it is almost like what was called in Greece like a hero sanctuary, where they would have a statue of the hero, and they would perform whatever rituals, and there would be a garden there. And they turned this street corner, and I think it's all gone now, but for a long time this is what was there. And there you have the big picture of George Floyd, and there's what looks like a greenhouse. I'm not sure what that is about. But anyway, so like I said, normally you do this dressing up and this sanctifying the sacrifice before the sacrifice, and then there's this processional, right, leading up to the sanctuary where the sacrifice takes place. What happened with George Floyd was the sacrifice took place, and then afterwards you had the processionals, you had the marches, right, which were, instead of being marches with music and happiness, there were marches of anger, and which turned into looting.
Like a death hunt.
And then he got dressed up, and you can go to the next pictures, I think.
Before we go, was that always there, or is that new?
Oh no.
That's what they made a garden out of. I don't know what they put, some kind of thing.
So even if this wasn't there, right, it's like this is a crossroads.
Yes.
38th.
And it took place at the crossroads.
Yeah, 38th in Chicago, and of course Chicago is, God knows what Chicago is tied up in, between Alinsky and their bishops and
this reminds me of Robert Johnson and the Crossroads, and then the deal with the devil.
Yes. Robert Johnson shows up early in my book about the crossroad deals in this book.
But it is interesting how this seemed to unfold. It seemed to unfold organically, like this, because this is an archetypal template. It's like it's within the psyche of the human being to have events unfold this way. And I know so much of it was orchestrated, but there's still a component that it's in the DNA. It's like we're hardwired to do these things, and you either do it consciously for upliftment, or you do it unconsciously and it's for the detriment.
It's a really interesting question, it's like the chicken and the egg, because we know that a lot of this stuff is psychologically operated.
Yes.
And
For sure.
the psychological operation is initiation, right?
Yes.
But then you have all these other things that line up, that you almost have to, when you add them all up, the odds get really, really high,
right,
for a lot of this stuff. And one of the things that I have talked about, and I think I was one of the first people to mention this, is the relationship between Prince, and Minneapolis, which is where this takes place. And Prince being a Gemini, which again, the symbol of Hermes, and his band being the Revolution, right? And when Prince died on the Queen's birthday in 2016, right? So it's a bit ahead of this whole thing, but you have the Prince and the Queen, and then they called Prince the Purple One, right? And then everything post George Floyd is bathed in purple, right? So, and it takes place during the month of Gemini, the 25th. And again, what are the odds around all of this?
And there was a lot of purple floating around. I remember the Clintons wearing purple.
Well, that was
it. A purple tie, and she had a purple shirt.
Well, Prince had died by then.
But it was prominent.
It was definitely prominent. They were announcing that this is the Purple Revolution.
Yeah. Right. And so you can go, there's a couple of things. One, people who write books, or you can find this in Shakespeare, that there are, if you're writing a book and getting, most people who write books feel like they're getting downloads. And this actually came to me as a download, and I'm unpacking it. Then you'll find structures in it that you didn't know were there.
Right.
When you're done writing. So, I mean, that's actually fairly common. Like people find all these, where you look at the midpoint word, in a Shakespeare play, it might be like midpoint or something like that, so all that sort of stuff going on.
And the other thing too, which again, coincidental or not, it's there. I went in and I looked at the last in-person gathering in Aspen for the Aspen Festival for Ideas, whatever they call it, right? So they have all these people show up in Aspen, Colorado, and they're there to be introduced to a lot of new ideas, which have to do with, whatever the new idea du jour is. In this case, where we are now, the World Economic Forum, sustainability, all that stuff. So I went through the roster of all the attendees at that event, that festival. Alicia Garza was there. Wow. From Black. Not only that, but there was a preponderance of people on the civil servant side from Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth. And I thought, that's really odd. Like, why are all these people, at this event? And I don't know if they go every year. I didn't go back and check other festivals. I forget the name of the Aspen. There's a certain name for it. But I just thought that the confluence of players, right? And even, and this is what blew my mind, is that they have these scholarships where these people will send, like there's a George W. Bush scholarship. So George Bush sends people to the Aspen Ideas Festival every year. And the other big player every year they send people to this festival is Chick-fil-A. And I thought to myself, well, that's really weird. And then one of the big players post George Floyd is the CEO for Chick-fil-A. And he shows up on some talk show, giving some black dude a shoe shine. And I'm like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. Right.
Right.
So again, it's like, they're sort of preloading everything. To what end? I mean, do they all know that something's going to go down? Do they have some idea that something's going to go down? And then you have all the kind of the mythopoetic and synchromistic unfolding of these things. It's just a strange confluence of so-called reality.
And the scholarship system is, of course, one of the, from the Rhodes scholarships on and on, they've been one of the great, control systems.
That's
that
right.
have been going on for a long time.
Very much.
So, so you get into David Dorn a little bit here.
Yes, well, because I just trying to so I do get into a little bit above, but we talked about it before we got on. The fact is that the original autopsy found 0 neck injury on the
Right.
body of George Floyd.
Right.
And
right.
it was basically his heart failed because he took a lot of drugs. And what didn't come out at the time was him saying, I have the quote from wherever it came from. This is part of Miriam Hanine's work, that, he and her film should be coming out in not too long.
Yeah.
That he said, he said, I ate too many drugs. And when he was saying, I can't breathe, he was sitting inside the Mercedes Benz before they got him out. So, and it was before Chauvin showed up. So,
Right.
so the whole thing, is some kind of contrived sacrifice.
Well, yeah.
And my best guess at this point is that, because no one knows, not even his best friend, how all of a sudden he got the fentanyl. He didn't walk into the store loaded on fentanyl and methamphetamine, but somewhere along the line,
he certainly didn't have the appearance of somebody who was that whacked out. You ever see anybody on fentanyl?
Yeah.
They are whacked out.
Right. So he's fine, and then all of a sudden he's looped. Where he took it and how, no one seems to know.
Or did someone?
Well, that's what Kanye West talked
in
about
him?
the other day.
Okay.
So what did he say?
Well, this is what got him in trouble with George Floyd's daughter. Now Kanye West is being sued for $250 million. We talked about this, and Kanye West set up a scholarship fund for that daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody from the Floyd family ever reached out to him and thanked him or anything like that.
No. So
this is what he says. This is what he says. As Kanye says this.
Okay.
He said that George Floyd was having a conversation with one of his buddies. And he said, they be looking for somebody like me. They be looking for a big man, somebody big like me. Who the they are, that's up for discussion.
So we never find out. Okay.
Right. Well, I think Kanye is intimating very openly who he thinks that they are. Okay. And then Kanye says, and that's when they hit him with the fentanyl. So he believes that one of the cops or maybe somebody else poked him with fentanyl. The thing with fentanyl too
is it injectable, or you have?
Well, it's injectable, but it is so powerful that all you have to do is come into contact with it, and you can get a deadly contact high from it. So it could have happened anywhere along the way. And again, we have to be careful what we say now. But I had somebody share with me who has a friend who is a respiratory, kind of a high level respiratory therapist. And they looked at that photo and they said that if Derek Chauvin did indeed have his neck on George Floyd would not have been able to speak.
His knee.
Yeah.
His knee on George Floyd's neck. Mm-hmm. Right. He would not have been able to speak and say, I can't breathe.
Because of vocal cords would have
not been able to happen. It's just physically impossible to do that.
Right. But go ahead.
And then you and I talked about this earlier. And again, this is a disclaimer. This is my own observation. That when I first saw what was happening, the way that the body was positioned, George Floyd is a big dude. Mm-hmm. He's probably about 6'5", and thick, right? What I saw kind of laid out prone next to that car didn't resemble that. Looked like something that was, kind of rubbery.
Or at least a corpse.
Whatever it was, it did not resemble the same body type. Mm-hmm. And even when, again, I'm no expert, but when I did see the knee on the neck, it almost looked like it was going into the thing, right?
Into the thing.
Into what, it was
like it had a little indentation.
Exactly. So, I have my
So like a mannequin.
Yes, I have my disclaimer doubts about that even being the person that we're talking
Right.
about.
Right, but we don't even have to, because we have the autopsy, and then who do they bring in? I forget his name, right? The
You'll roll your eyes.
the guy who starts off with Kennedy, and he's done basically every autopsy.
He did Epstein, didn't he?
Yeah,
Yes, he
yeah.
did.
He's like, it's like
It's like a
astonishing. He's like 1,000 years old. I think he did King Tut too.
How do they even keep a straight face, you know?
So but the original, I call it an autopsy at a distance that this guy does, right? So they call him to question everything, but the fact is, the initial autopsy, he does not have a contusion on the neck where
That's
the
right.
knee was.
That's right.
So period. It should be end of story, but it didn't even end up in the trials, and the trials are a whole other weird story. But anyway, yeah. So you can see that this is the postmortem. So not only is he an angel, he went to Klaus Schwab's tailor for for the design of him. It's like stunning.
His angelic cloaks and his gauntlet. What do you call these? Not gauntlets.
I don't know. Not
the arm pieces.
Yeah, I don't know. But so anyway, the going, just circling back, the deification came after.
Right. And how many stars are on his crown there? Do you know?
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Right. So basically
stars.
he was turned into an angel, even though he was a career criminal. And, and in fact, here's my Bowie quote. We know Major Tom's a junkie strung out in heaven's high, hitting an all-time low.
Great song.
It is. So he said, I ate too many drugs. He said, I can't breathe before all this happened. So, and then we have, remember Maya Santa Maria, who is who owned the club where Chauvin and Floyd worked.
That's right.
And she said in Spanish, I heard it. I found that, it was out. Miriam sent me the video of it. She said in Spanish that it was a literal sacrifice. That's how she described what happened. And then what happened, I don't know, within a couple of days, I forget, that her place gets burned down. That club gets burned down. The whole block gets burned down.
And wasn't there something about counterfeit money?
Oh yeah.
That was the original reason they were called in.
Yeah, right. but there was some other building where they thought that they were printing.
Right. They thought that was where it was being printed.
It's probably across the street.
Okay.
Right.
And there was a whole spate of counterfeit bills that were showing up at that time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they were coming through Minneapolis. And so he theoretically had a counterfeit 20, right?
Right.
And that's what triggered the call to the cops.
The whole
right, which again generally would not have happened. It's like something
and
that
even
even
the idea of something that's counterfeit, it's a facsimile of something.
Right. Of course, it's a commentary
everything
on the whole thing.
about the whole.
Yeah, interesting.
Event.
So, and then we can briefly.
Here's your Blantifa.
So again, and we see this beautiful picture coming up of Patrice Cullors.
This really freaked me out when I saw this.
Sorry, I don't want to.
This was a video, actually.
Yeah. So this is some ritual that she did, but just to because I know we're kind of clogging up the time capsules. What happens is, so they not only claim they're trained Marxists, but they claim that they do Yoruba rituals. And in these rituals, it's not like, so again, there's this sort of inversion. For example, if you're doing a Greek ritual sacrifice, you're trying to connect with deities, whether it's Demeter, whether it's Zeus, whatever. You're making an offering to them. They're making an offering to what they call the spirits of the dead. And they've included, they include Martin Luther King. They include, there's anybody who's basically Black, and their ritual, it's a naming ritual. So you keep on repeating the name, And that's how you call in their spirits. And it's not the spirits because you want to honor them, but it's the spirits because you want them to be under your control.
Like Breonna Taylor, say
So,
her
right.
name, say her name.
Exactly. So that's where,
Because you want to use those spirits.
so
in
that's
like
where
a-
it begins.
It's like a death cult.
Right. And so what happens is, so and this is actually goes back to, so in the Yoruba culture, and I get a direct quote from a scholar talking about it, not only is that ritual common, and not only is there a sacrifice involved with that ritual, but if you were a king, you would have people sacrificed alongside you so that they would still serve you
Mm.
in the underworld.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is what they're involved in. This is in behind the whole BLM thing.
I hope King Jasper doesn't hear that.
No. Jasper's pure.
Hashtags are for us are way more than a hashtag. It's literally almost resurrecting the spirit so they can work through us to get the work that we need to get done. When we speak their names, we do that all we do all the time, that you kind of invoke a spirit, that spirit, and those spirits actually become present with you. Is that the quote you got from the Yoruba scholar?
That's the quote from there. Yeah, that's from a talk between Patrice Cullors and I forget the woman you meant from
Was
LA
that
Garza.
phone
Alicia Garza.
Was
So
that
she's
the phone?
she's actually
Yeah.
referencing hashtags as kind of this what would you call it, like
Enchanting like a calling.
mnemonic
Yeah.
tool or something like that?
Yeah,
or-
so they're using it, but the hashtag is also in their protests and in their calling out and
Right.
and in the rituals they do before and after.
right.
So
Well, you know, they did this at Occupy Wall Street, and then they would have somebody who would say something,
right.
then everybody would repeat it,
Yes.
right? And they'd say something, and they'd repeat it again and again and again and again. And
Yeah.
even like Occupy Wall Street, they had drummers.
Mhm.
I thought they were doing that so that the people in the back could hear.
Well, that's what they're telling you.
Yeah, that's
Right,
what they're
right,
telling
right,
you,
right.
but maybe it's more than that.
Yeah.
That's the surface level.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah,
it
good point.
is. Yeah, go ahead.
No, just saying good point.
Yeah.
So where is this the one that got hit with lightning or?
No, but it's
No.
like it. It's like it.
Where was that?
That's in DC somewhere, I think.
That was like,
Yeah.
That
So
was telling, wasn't it?
that was just like, how is
Yeah.
that even possible?
So then this is quick, that I just got into like the Rand Paul after the 2020 Republican, was it
It says
convention or was
convention, yeah.
they were walking back and they got
After
surrounded.
Trump's closing
They got
speech.
surrounded and,
He and his wife.
and his wife said, I was dealing, basically she was saying, I'm dealing with zombies, like they were saying, they were whatever, calling her, whatever, whore, bitch, and all this sort of stuff. And she says, look, my husband authored, the no knock act, the no, what you call it, no warrant, no
Right. Warrantless search.
warrantless search, thank you, act, and in Breonna Taylor's name. Why are you going after us? But that's they were
And
up
at the
against
time,
zombies.
she said that she was trying to like look someone in the eyes and make a human connection. She could not make a human connection,
When you're around a
which
person,
really chilled her to the bone.
if you've ever been around a person who is checked out for whatever reason, and you try to make eye contact with them, it's impossible. It's impossible. I mean, I've actually witnessed it firsthand on numerous occasions, and it's almost like a form of possession, really.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think there's a lot more of that going around than we realize.
And I remember watching that video, and they got roughed up.
They did.
Yeah.
They got roughed up, and,
Yeah.
and Paul even had security, but his security was, overwhelmed by the crowd. It was scary.
It was.
Right,
It
right.
was.
But luckily, the police saved them.
Imagine
The
that.
same police that those people were trying to defund.
So you make this connection between Yoruba, Blantifa, Colors, Garza, that they're engaged in some form of conscious ritual magic. around BLM and firing or charging these events up, right? This is what you're essentially saying.
Right,
It
because
would
this is
appear
what,
that way.
right, because then this is, because what happens afterwards is a dark anti-celebration of a ritual, you
Right.
know? So, and then this is, you can pass through this. This is like all of the fun stuff that BLM has been accused of, just in case nobody knows, how, how desperately what they say they are. And then this is a crater, another Greek depiction of a celebration of a Greek, after a Greek sacrificial ritual, or just said Greeks getting down. So they would dance and sing, play music. And then you got the opposite of it coming up, which is the fires in Washington. After
Destruction.
DC.
Mhm.
That's the best picture I could find of that. So,
This,
and then,
this was clever. Instead of the statute of limitations, you have the limitation of statues.
that's right. That's right.
Statues, yeah,
It
that's
was
good.
said of James Joyce that English was written for him to play with. I'm not quite James Joyce, but I love playing with English.
That's
So
good.
yes, so then we get into, so then the erasing culture, the statues coming down, and then, I named, people who would take Washington, Jefferson, that notorious slaveholder, Jesus Christ, the abolitionist, Frederick Douglass, it just goes on and on. And then also, then I just kind of brought it home here where they took down the obelisk in the center of town, which I think was a piece of Masonic lithopuncture, in other words, acupuncture.
I've actually been there. I've been to this place.
Okay. So what I
That's,
did.
that's in your town, right? Asheville?
Yes.
Yes, and please note all the architecture that is now gone, that beautiful castle. They ripped it down.
Yeah. I'll skip the narrative that Steve would not have a fun time discussing. We'll glance over that
one.
narrative.
Oh, that one.
That narrative, yes.
Yeah.
But they took this down, huh?
Right. And what I did, did when they said they were looking for feedback on whether to take it down, and soon realized it was a fait accompli, but because even though 2/3 of the city did not want it taken down, even though 80% of the city is woke. Anyway, so I just.
They should have just painted it. They should have just painted it brown.
Yep. Well, they covered it up. They covered
Chris-
it up
Chris-
with
Chris
black
got
for a
that.
while, and yes, well, they covered it up
Did I? No.
black with black
You were
covering,
chuckling.
and the
But I
base the
sorry.
base was wide, and it looked like a huge black schlong for
Right.
the longest time.
Right. There you go. Problem solved, right?
So
Change the color.
so now there's just the base that's left, and it's just stupid.
Chunky.
It's just stupid. So anyway, so that's just bringing it home to here. Yes, and then there's a little bit about the kneeling, which came around too, which again kneeling is usually considered with prayer, but of course it was not. It was just capitulation to the sacrifice they did.
That's the exact word that was just right in my head. It's capitulation.
Yeah.
And then you have what's interesting there too. You have the word kaput, right? Kaput, which is connected the head and algal and the throat, right? Yeah.
Right. So I don't, and I don't think we have time to get into the rest of it, because that's where
it's pretty deep. I mean, you get in, you're going all the way up into this stuff here, right?
Yeah. So this gets into so then again, getting into what is important about the blood, and the end game of all of this was the vaccine, the spike proteins, the putting in the
those are not your typical clots. I'm sorry.
No, so those are clots found by and so the people that really been uncovering what's going on are the mortuary people, the people of funeral homes who said, by the way, we had the same number of deaths in 2020, and then as we've had previously, and then 2000, once the vaccines hit, the mRNA device, that was it. It was over. Then we're having way more deaths. We don't know where to put the babies right now. I mean, it's awful. So,
and they just approved 15-0 for the infant inoculation.
So this gets back into the old Faust legend, and then I get into Steiner and his whole idea of the importance of blood. And for him, you control someone's ego by controlling the blood. And that's really the most important takeaway from all of that. But I get into that.
Do you remember Genesis Peorage from Psychic TV, Throbbing Gristle?
Yeah.
So Stephen Kent knew him in a little bit. Actually, I wonder if Steve would mind me sharing this. Stephen actually got involved with Genesis ex-wife Allura for a while in California. So, but he knew Genesis. I probably should. It doesn't really matter. They're not together anymore. But he knew he was kind of in the Genesis circle in London for a bit. But I heard this story from this woman in a pool in Chichen Itza.
Really?
And she was English. She was a stylist. And I was hanging out with her in this pool, in this hotel. And she was, a stylist in London. And she told me that when Genesis would have parties, he would send out an invitation and you had to RSVP with either blood or semen.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So to your point, right? There you go. That's not the story. Stephen told me a different story. Anyway, so this is really, really deep. You got some Frida Kahlo in here.
And and then I do like a page and a half of quotes from Elana Freeland's book about the graphene oxide, and how it's going in, what it's doing, how it's an antenna, and all of that. So
this is just one chapter. I mean, this is
the biggest chapter, but it's a lot here, but I think it works pretty well. It was written over a long period of time, and I appreciate anybody who wants to be sent a copy of it. They know how to contact me through Logo Sophia Books.
I'll put the link in the show notes.
There's our email is there, so you can contact me. I'd be happy to send you. Because of all the images, it's a 25 megabyte file, so I have to send it via Hightail or some file sharing service.
And of course you're going to have a hardcover copy
of the book.
Yes.
I'm probably only I'm going to make it large, not quite coffee table, but I'll see how large I can go once we get to the number of pages. It's going to be full color because I really want the images to stand out. I think the images are really important. And
it's going to be, I'm assuming this is going to be like a limited run. Like you're not going to do a ton of them.
Well, no, I do everything. Well, we do everything on demand.
Okay.
So that way things stay in print, and because I can't pay for storage.
Right.
We have one distributor in Berkeley that stores our books.
Who stores your books? 10-Speed Press?
No, Small Press Distribution. They're actually a nonprofit distributor. So they've been good. They carry our books. Good, yeah. And they also can sell to Amazon and what have you. So we just, so I can order as many books as I need,
All right. Should we end on a few Halloween photos?
Yeah, well, thank you, Robert, for
thank you so much
for going through all that and giving people a taste of what I've been working on and yakking about and not finishing in the year and a half.
All right, I just got to find this folder now that I created.
So what we sent Robert, and I'll just give a quick intro to it because we're coming up on All Hallows Eve when the veils are thinnest. My family in Brooklyn and on Long Island in the 50s and 60s, and really almost up until this day, had something called the Cousins Club, and they would do these Halloween parties, and they just got into it. My cousin Francine is like, her father took a lot of pictures, and he was kind of the curator.
He was a professional.
He was a professional photographer for a while. Took amazing photographs. Anyway,
really like museum quality, some of these photos that she's unearthed.
Yes. Now, so anyway, all these were taken from around 58 to 62, 63 actually. So up until almost just like a few weeks before the Kennedy assassination. And they just got into it. They would not only have the costumes, but they would be in character for the duration of the party. and just to see, really a completely different world, this generation before mine and my family, what they were doing, and whether or not it was.
Well, and so many of them had come from Sicily.
Some of them were from
Right.
Sicily, most of them first generation
Sicily.
Americans.
So they had those old world sensibilities that they brought
Right,
to it.
right. And they were all cousins, and they formed this club, and they would have dances and
Kind of makes
monthly
you
meetings.
think like that movie, The King of Hearts, right? With all the characters and
Yeah,
costumes and
yeah.
So now
dancing through
I'm
the
just
streets.
trying to find where I put them because
Oh,
I
Robert.
download, and so I'm not in my normal space, and it's starting to get really bright up here,
Uh-huh.
and I can't. And so the sun is in my eyes here a little bit. Just give me a sec.
Yeah.
I know I'll find them because I only have so many folders on my
Okay.
desktop.
Yeah. So this was a nice thing. My cousin Fran, who still lives in Queens, and her father, my uncle Sal, died at the age of, I think, 95, 96.
Mhm.
And he died just before the COVID thing. It was like January of 2019. So thankful for that, she didn't have to be separated from him
Mhm.
when he passed. While we were doing that, I'll tell you a funny story about my Uncle Sal then. So my cousin Fran, who can tell it better than me, was at his bedside, and his blood pressure, I think, was like so low that they were keeping him alive by machine, basically, or by drug. And so they had a discussion, and they said, all right, well, with her and with him, and he's like, fine, pull the plug, I'm ready to go. So, so they pull the plug, and it's like, half hour later, he's talking to his daughter, Fran, I'm still here. When am I getting out of here? He's like, Dad, I don't know. I can't control that. Dad, I'm ready. Get me out of here. So they have this like argument before his way out.
All right. So I'm going to have to go into your email, and let me see if I can find it really quickly through the email.
I think there were just two of them.
Two emails.
Yes. Hold on. And I'm not sure how I'm going to. I apologize for that. I know that I put them in the.
I'm sure.
Put it in the folder.
I'm sure. People should know we kind of threw this together. We've had like an incredibly busy week. Besides Chris just coming back around, and
Yeah, it's been
we had
kind of bumpy.
We had our first freeze, so there was all the scramble in the garden to take everything down, and I've had aspects of 5 Logosophia projects coming in at the same time. So, dealing with a lot of stuff, which is all good.
Well, you can talk a little bit about Elisa's book coming
Right.
out.
So,
which is also a very intense book.
Yes. So Elisa E., who already put out 2 books, My Life in MK Ultra. She's been on with Emily. I don't think you've ever had her on, Robert. But she's been on with Emily and some other people. Anyway, those books were incredible, but she redid them, added new information, over the past 10 years, things that she didn't want to say in the first 2 books. And we've taken them and her collages, which is what she used to break herself out of the whole MK Ultra programming, was part of it anyway. We've put in, so it's going to be a full color book. So we combine the 2 books, and it's all of her new material that we're getting really close to bringing out, at least within a couple of weeks, maybe
really
2-3
close.
weeks, as soon as the cover's
And Elana
finished.
Freeland has been very supportive.
Elana Freeland wrote the foreword for the book. So that's all great. So appreciative of that.
Okay, let's just go through a few of these here. So there's this one.
Right. So, so this just to show how into it they got with the costuming. This one's kind of interesting because they're all like looking like they're coming back from the old world,
Yeah, they are.
So that's one. You can just like move along.
Skip through them.
Let me see. What do we have here? There's another one here where they're starting to get a little festive. Right here.
Yeah, so they would have these little halls, right? That's those two are. I'm not sure. I remember who's in the middle, but that's Shorty and his wife. Everyone, there were a number of Shorties because they're all short. Anyway,
so this is in terms of contemporary culture. This is interesting because we got this guy with hardcore cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then
yep.
you have this guy cross-dressing. They kind of
Yes.
cancel each other out.
Right. Yeah, no, and you know, and you can see these guys, and they were serious because they actually had like real money as for the best costume.
Yeah.
You
And
mean as
back
a
then,
reward? As a
yeah, you know, it's like,
prize?
you know, back in the, you know, they would have dues that would go into their cousin's club, and out of that there would be whatever, you know, $100 reward for best costume, and you know that was good money back then. That was real good money back
Mhm.
then.
So that brings us back to competition, Chris.
Yep,
I know.
I know. So that's
This is a good one.
that's a nice shot of the whole group. Yep. So there's that same, this is the same person who was this is another year. So the same person who was in the dress has got a lollipop in his mouth.
Yeah, that's an interesting character. Milton Berle was very popular back then, wasn't he?
Yeah, I remember. I used to watch him. That was Sunday night, right? He was on.
Yes. And Milton Berle did a little bit of cross-dressing.
Mhm.
Oh, it was part of that, and you know, blackface was just part of vaudeville back then.
Yeah, it's true.
You know, right. So there's a great costume, and
There's
there's
hobo in the back. Little Bo Peep.
There
Or
was
maybe it's
Yeah.
Raggedy Ann.
Yeah, so I'm sure you couldn't use too many of these costumes now. I don't know whether that's a Sheik of Araby or whatever.
Well, maybe it's Aladdin with a lamp.
Yeah.
Or something.
there was
Yeah.
one woman who was extremely attractive. Let me see if I can find her picture.
Probably my mom.
Well, Fran was very
If you
pretty.
find the one with Charlie Chaplin, that's my mom.
Let me see. Some
Well,
great
you know,
pictures
I
here.
hope people enjoying these. It's just kind of a fun thing to do.
This one is funny right here. This is a funny one. Let me just see if I can bring this up. This is a funny one. This has all kinds of things going on here. You've got kind of a space guy. You've got a mummy. You've got a cowboy. You got a hobo. You got a constable. Right. This is a funny picture. Right here. Look at that.
Oh yeah, there's
Right.
the mummy.
Right. So that's
Well,
actually.
that's-
Go ahead.
That's Uncle Sal.
Yeah, that's Francine's father, my Uncle Sal,
Who we just
The-
told you
as
the
the
story
hobo.
about who, just died.
and that's my father as the spaceman. So you've got
Oh,
the
that's
whole
the Tin Man, don't you think?
Tin Man. No, I think he was a
Yeah.
Oh, he
spaceman.
was a space.
He was
He's
a
wearing a
spaceman.
he's wearing a tinfoil hat.
Exactly. So this is early on in my family. You know,
No
the
wonder,
legacy continues.
no wonder where you got your crazy
Yeah.
conspiracy mind from. Look at that.
And that's actually my godfather about to pistol whip the mummy. And you can see half of my mother with the straw hat. To
He
the
looks
left.
he looks a little too familiar with that technique there, Steve.
Yeah, he might have. Yeah. So, yeah. So, yeah. And like I said, they would be like if you find the one with Charlie Chaplin, my mother said she didn't say a word during the whole party.
I
would
saw
stay in
I saw
character.
that. I saw that one. Oh, this is the woman who maybe it's your mom. This is the woman who I was looking at. Let's see, where is she? This woman.
Oh,
That- I think I'm pretty sure that's Gloria. I'm not really sure. Fran would have to correct me. I think she was the one who married Serge. There was a few people like married outside of the Italians.
Hold on. Let me see if I
She
can.
married an Armenian, if that's her. Anyway,
I mean, look at that face.
Yeah, yeah,
Look at that face. She is beautiful.
yeah.
and
Beautiful
and I'm
eyebrows.
guessing that's a wig.
Well,
Could be.
Mm.
But
I mean, they're
anyway,
all
yeah.
attractive in their own way, right?
mhm.
But she's kind of like next level attractive.
Got something going on, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So she married a Romanian guy or something like that?
Armenian, I believe.
Armenian.
And that's who I think it is. Yeah. So, they're kind of, distant cousins that I would see, basically at weddings and things like that.
But Fran has thousands of these photos.
I did see the Charlie Chaplin photo too, by the way.
So,
Well, thanks for sharing those.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Different
You
times.
can't find the Charlie Chaplin one?
Well, I probably could, but I'm running out of time.
Oh, you're running out of
Okay.
time.
I have a client in about 8 minutes.
Oh,
okay.
my.
Well,
Okay.
we
So-
want you to go through whatever your ablutions are before you do the,
Yeah, you're really
do
gonna
the
have to.
ritual.
I rubbed Jasper 3 times.
Uh,
The magic cat
Three.
gives me his power.
3 is like a warm up for
Well, thank you,
Jasper.
Robert. This was very, very nice of you. Very good of you to walk through this chapter with Steve.
Yeah, we pulled it together, and Steve, I can't wait for your book to come out.
Oh, it's going to be great.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
gonna be great.
Magnum opus,
Me
magnum
too.
opus
Yeah.
stuff.
There's a lot there. This is like, there's not much I have to say after this book.
Right. Yeah. Seems like you bring it all together.
So very good, Robert. Like I said, much appreciated. Again,
Sure.
glad you guys had a great weekend last weekend. I know the work you put into it, and sounds like it came off really well.
It was exceptional. So,
So,
well, Chris, glad you're back on your feet,
Thank you.
and
Yeah.
we'll catch up with you guys in a couple of weeks,
Okay, sounds good.
and I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about. We managed
Yep.
to get through the entire show without talking about Kanye. Imagine that. We talked about him a little bit. Of course, another Gemini, right, Jasper? Jasper. All right.
Jasper hung in with you.
Oh yeah, I got a little patch of sunlight here. He was just taking it all in.
Mhm.
He was charging up.
Good.
I think
thank you.
Jasper's a projector in human design.
Oh,
That's my sense. Yeah. Well, you guys take care. Have a great
Yeah.
weekend.
yeah. Thanks
And-
again. Thanks
Thanks
everybody
everybody
for
for
listening.
tuning
And
in.
I'll make sure you have all of the proper links in the show notes to go to your
All the
website
books.
and
Yeah.
check out your
Yeah.
books and do a pre-order on your book and all that stuff. Okay.
great.
Great,
Wonderful.
Robert.
Thanks so much, Robert.
All right. You guys
All
take
right.
care.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
take care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right. That was the Crimis ending yet another Friday FARcast. We'll be back on Sunday night with Sunday Night Astro Live. We'll be looking at the eclipse, Mars retrograde, all the hot and sexy, starry stuff that's happening in our lives. You don't want to miss out on that. Until then, use your head in order to discern what's real. Use your head in order to discern what's real. Your heart to stay open to what's possible. Chataria, love you. Mods, thank you. And from Jasper and I, au revoir. We'll see you on Saturday.